I guess maybe anyone who wants to answer, but maybe Juanita or Renee, if you guys could talk a little bit. I think what I love about this movie so much is how effortlessly and beautifully you weave together all of the different characters and all of the different perspectives, and how you go from the present tense of the event to kind of going back. And I just was wondering if you guys could all talk about that process a little bit.
Renee, why don't you start on that?
Well, first, Holly edited it. That was really made the difference because it could have been a big mishmash, but she really choreographed all these layers visually in terms of the content. I think it's one, for me, it's this idea of Rashomon, where in Rashomon, you had the rape in the forest and all these different witnesses had a different perspective, which was very much like the jury or the social actors involved in the case. And there was, at that time, a television show that I was obsessed with called Hill Street Blues. And it's one of the first shows that had these, these parallel stories that were woven in and out. And I thought, Rashomon and Hill Street Blues, somehow it really made a lot of sense. So yeah, a lot was going on there.
I was going to say, we can pass you a
Chris,
mic.
do you have any?
Here you go.
Speaking of Rashomon, there's
good?
two sides of this story. I was actually the third editor on this project, and Peter Conoy preceded me. He was a wonderful editor as well, and we've swapped jobs over the years. I was up in Maine, and Chris sent me a cut of the film to see if I was interested, and I said, well, let's see. And she said, Chris says, what are you going to do? And I said, hire me and I'll tell you. She said, okay, in her growly voice, and I said, Rashomon. So I don't know if that's where that idea originated, or we both had it. It sounds like we both had the idea.
It was probably your idea.
No, it was there from the beginning with you and Chris, as I recall.
The treatments.
In the treatments.
Well, the material is wonderful, so it shows in the material that they were thinking that way. It's just generous material, and I never saw the film as such a study in characters as I did tonight. And I don't even know that I was conscious that you had to really like Ron. You had to like him at the beginning. You had to sort of enter into that guy slowly, or the film wouldn't hold together. But I feel very good about all the other characters and how broad the context for the story really. And that's because they have so much material.
I was wondering if our producing team could talk a little bit about how does a movie like this get made?
So it's a movie that almost didn't get made. The very things that we're just talking about, the Rashomonian concept, the agitprop that was used in the film was a part of the initial treatment that we submitted. And at that time, for independent filmmakers, public broadcasting was a really big vehicle for independent film. The problem was twofold. One, at that time, and we're talking 1983 at this point, the standard for what was called public affairs documentaries had very much become the frontline model that was based upon the CBS Style Guide, which meant that you did not use recorded music, only extant music as they called it. You had a narrator. You did not tell stories that were not strictly linear. And all of that in the initial proposal that we developed was contrary to that. There was a bigger problem and a more pervasive problem, however, in that the field of contemporary issue documentary was strictly one, and I'm trying to think of some exceptions, but I really can't, that was controlled by white men. And if you look at us, you see that none of us are white men. So there was a huge issue as to whether three women of color not only had the filmmaking savvy, but the journalistic integrity to tell the story. Our funding was held up while they contemplated whether or not we needed a mentor. And ultimately, by the time they figured out, yes, they could do a mentoring program, they had given away all the money. So we had to actually come back and reapply again before funding. And then my job became to keep the mentor out of their way so that they can make the film.
That's very kind of you to say mentor. I call him my babysitter, our babysitter.
Indeed.
And you know, Chris was really experienced at that time. Like, why does she need a babysitter? You know, it's, remember that guy? I won't say his name. I won't say his name. Yeah. He was supposed to be
A
our
jerk.
babysitter.
So, I mean, there's the issue of race and racism in the film itself, but it's also an issue of racism within the industry itself. Even to the extent that as we were approaching the Cincinnati shoot, one of the gatekeepers, industry gatekeepers, I would say, asked me, why in the world would you want to work with two Asian American filmmakers? After all, it was a white guy who killed an Asian American. How can they be objective? So, we've got to really address the issue of who's telling the story, and how stories get framed and who usually tells the story.
Well, I was reading an interview with Renee, and I just found a great quote. She said, Toni Morrison talks about how the master narrative is not written by us. And I think that really relates to this film. I'm actually curious from anyone, what is it like to watch the film today? How do you feel about that narrative today?
I just love the last shot. Yeah. Let other people answer. I just want to talk about the restoration. Okay. Yeah.
So
Well, the
I wanna-
restoration, can I say, because you started with thanking everybody, Chris and her daughter Kuling like really pushed for this restoration, and I just want to give them a shout out for making it.
Well, I feel like there's two sides to what we're looking at today. One is the narrative of the story, and I think also we're here because of the narrative of the restoration. So maybe let's talk about the narrative of the story, and then because I really want Chris to get into the details of how we're so lucky to be able to be here. And it looks so incredible, but so maybe those will go in that order if that works for everybody.
So I just want to echo and perhaps amplify what Holly said about the characters, because it really resonated with me tonight looking at this restored version, how important it was that Vincent Chin was a human being and not just an object, not a victim, but a child who grew up with aspirations and goals, and a mother who persevered and had fortitude and, just tenacity to keep pushing. And I really have to credit you, Nancy, for all of the effort that you did in really working with Mrs. Chin and doing the interviews and doing the translations, because that was one of the key issues. I'm from Detroit originally, and I was working in Detroit at Detroit Public Television at the time. And one of the things that I noticed was, despite all of the coverage, nobody was talking to anybody in the Asian American community aside from press conferences, which were, sound bites, basically. But nobody delved inside. They would talk to their neighbor, the Ebens neighbors, but not even person on the street commentary.
I remember very early on in the production, we had a meeting, and I think, Renee, you were the one who mentioned that the film is about the American dream of Ebens, from Wisconsin, coming to Detroit, work in the industry, and also the American dream of the Chinese family, the Chin family. And Detroit was a place where they met, and also that Detroit has to be one of the major character of the film. And I think yes,
That's what I was going to say.
yes. So I think now watching the film again, 30 some years later, it hit me again, and especially watching all the stuff of Detroit, that really makes sense to me now. Again.
Well, you really enter the spaces. You of course you start in Fancy Pants, and it's not as you feel have a lot of feeling for that place right from the start, and for those women as people. It's just respectful of everyone in the film, I think, and that's the material that you guys gathered.
And Nancy, can you talk about your developing that relationship with Lily? Because she was really the surrogate for Vincent, since Vincent had passed.
My role really was to work with the Chinese community to get that story out. And I think, was his name Benny? Benny
Oh,
Ing?
yeah.
Remember
Benny,
Benny is
yeah.
the man who was also in the film. He worked for Ford. Anyway, so I spent a lot of time in Chinatown, actually, trying to get their story, because, and what I found is that many of the people have actually worked in the plants, but none of them were acknowledged. And they were just people working there day and night, and they didn't get the same kind of recognition or the same kind of promotion that the white Americans were getting. So that was part of the story. And then later on, we found out also that Lily was also working not in the assembly line, but she was also working in an industry that was related to the auto industry.
Yeah, those brushes. They
Yeah,
made those brushes,
yes.
yeah.
So everyone was related in Detroit to the auto industry, but why is it that the Asian community or the Chinese community were in the background and they were never acknowledged? So that was part of the story that we want to bring out too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and working with Lily was quite tough, because I certainly haven't experienced someone that close to me that died, and for her it was so close to her, and every time that we talk, it was about Vincent. And after we made the film, she went to China, and then I continued to visit her in China, and until later then she got sick, and then she came back here for cancer treatment. Yes, and then she passed away.
Well, maybe that last shot of her before it cuts to the gas station, which I have to say, as programming this movie, the file we had to watch was not the restoration, and I had never seen the gas station shot before, and it really does bring it back to the city, and it really does take her words and give them this boost, which is so exciting. So, Christine, can you talk a little bit about this restoration? Because Janice Films, I know, now has the movie, and I think it's just, I'm so thankful that we're all here and able to watch it together again.
Well, the restoration itself is a movie. Anybody want to make it? It costs fortune. It's a little cheaper than Jane Founder's, facelifting. Well, it started in 2017. That's the discussion began, and but it was not a priority for the Academy at the time, perhaps. So they weren't able to raise the money. Everything costs money, okay? Until last year, and I was able to approach one of my former students named Todd Phillips, who's known for writing, directing for Joker. Anyone see it? And of course, because he said I should not mention Hangover, because he's always a hangover, okay? And with his little contribution, then the Film Foundation came in, which is founded by Martin Scorsese, and he is, 100% behind supporting the restoration. And then came to Hobson Lucas Foundation. And Melody Hobson, who's an African-American woman, who was instrumental in fact, they changed the name of the Woodrow Wilson building at Princeton to Hobson Hall. You know who's Woodrow Wilson, right? Who owned the slaves. And he married to Georgia Lucas, Star Wars. Yeah. So these three entities came in and was able to give the basic financial support. And Michael from the Academy, can never pronounce his name. Michael, let me see. I wrote it down. I got Pogorowski, yeah. And he was able to hook up the team. One is the picture, which is roundabout, and then you have the sound element, okay, which is another company, and it is called, I think, my gosh, there's so many notes, you know. I think it's called roundabout, and doesn't matter. Auto mechanic and mechanics, auto mechanics. So very strange name, and it took them forever because it was shot in film, 16 millimeter film. I was one of the camera person, and those days it was analog. Okay, so now you're gonna digitize it. So the first process you have to look at your negative, which is healthy or not, and thank God it's healthy. So there's two processes. One is called wet gate and one is called dry gate. And our negative went through dry gate, okay? And it was preserved that each shot has to be re-digitized in 4K, you know. And it took a long time. I think about 7 months, and because also the COVID, you know, and you know, that delayed some of the process. Then after digitizing, before they put on the final version, and my daughter is here, Kool-Aid, are you here? Oh yeah, hi. She's a DP, she's a cinematographer. And she helped me to do the color correction, which took a long time because some of the color was very pink, you know. So we went through that, and everything looks pretty good.
So Chris, tell us where the negative was.
What?
The negative. Where did you find the negative?
That's Nancy. Where's Nancy? Yeah, Nancy. Nancy Yao. Well, the negative was preserved at Chinese American Museum. You see outside they were picketing. They were against them. But the Nancy will get. So anyway,
I can answer your question.
Ended up right now it's final version. This version, what you just saw, it's called what do you call it? It's very, yeah, it's called DCP, Digital Cinema Package. Wow, you know, very complicated, you know. And that's how it was finally done. And it was a lot of work. And I really, really thanked for, you know, people who were able to support this film. And I was honored to be a part of this process. And Nancy, who saved our lives, even after fire at the museum. Go ahead, Nancy. Yeah.
Well, Christine, I cannot tell you how many conversations Mocha had with Christine and just her tenacity for saying this work is so critically important to survive. And some of you may know Mocha experienced a 5-alarm fire in the densest part of New York City on January 23rd, 2020. And just to tell you how important this work is, that work survived this 5-alarm fire. To give you a sense, the 5th floor burned to the 4th floor, burned to the 3rd floor. The entire 1st floor was flooded. Who Killed Vincent Chin's negatives and notes are on the 2nd floor. And it's just, but it's also, Christine Choy, even if it burned, she would have taken the ashes and reproduced the whole thing. But I just want to say the context, and I just have to say thank you to Christine and the entire team here, because everyone's talking about now as this moment, as this anti-Asian American moment. It is not. And it is not a moment. We know it's part of systemic racism and that all the problems with our systems because of Who Killed Vincent Chin. Because that exists, because your work exists, that's why we can all say now, we cannot let this go further. And that was 40 years ago, and I beg all of you to ask the question, has enough changed?
Well, I think that's a really good note where we are because we're basically running out of time. But Christine, I didn't know if you wanted to mention our special audience member or not.
Special what?
Audience member. I don't. Well. Nope.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, there's a woman who's very shy, but she says she's no longer shy. Her name's Annie Tan. Where's Annie? Yo, Annie. Annie is the relative of Vincent Chin's family, and I would really like to have her to conclude this conversation.
Yeah, I think this is a really good way to end things.
Yeah, she said she didn't want to be on the stage. Come on, girl. Go ahead. Take my mic.
All right.
You want to sit down?
No.
No, let's go.
I teach all day. I stand all day. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure what quite to say, but thank you both for making this. Lily passed away a year before I found out about Vincent. So this is kind of my shot to see and hear her voice and how hard she fought. I found out actually because I was watching another PBS documentary called Becoming American, The Chinese Experience. And my mom just popped over like while I was on, and she saw Vincent's photo on the screen and was like, "Go hey lei biu go," that's your cousin. And my mom's only mentioned Vincent like 3 or 4 times more. Once when my brother wanted to go to a bar at 11, she said, "Don't get killed like your cousin." And just twice more to say, "Don't talk about your cousin because it's too traumatic for us." And so to see this legacy when my family is so traumatized and won't talk about it is just so important. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on this team for doing that for me and for so many generations of my family who are fighting back. Like Vincent, and I think I just look every day to my great auntie Lily, and I fight every day because I know she would say you have to fight even if all the odds are against us. So I fought against unsafe school reopenings. I fought for Asian American rights, for tenants' rights here in Chinatown, for unionizations, right? And we have to live that legacy. So just thank you, everyone here. This means so much that it's restored. I hope it gets a wider message to the world. So thank you.
Can I say
Thank you,
one
everyone.
thing? Can I say one thing about Annie? And we don't have time?
If it's quick, go ahead.
Okay, so Annie has really inherited Lily's courage. There was a number of years ago, there were loads of Asian Americans protesting on behalf of Peter Leong, the NYPD officer who actually shot and killed Akai Gurley. Akai Gurley his crime was just, the elevator was broken, so he walked into a stairwell and he was unarmed, he was killed, he was, bled out. And so, some Asian Americans were saying, well, because Peter Leong, the cop, was indicted and prosecuted, so they were saying, well, he's the Vincent Chin. This is unfair. It's like real grievance. But the Vincent Chin case was always about justice, not about grievance. And Annie, who grew up in Chinatown, whose family was there, spoke out and said, "Do not use my uncle's name in this way," and wrote a Medium article. And, she got a lot of shit for that, even from her family. Yeah. And that just took a lot of courage to stand up, just stand up for the truth and for justice. So I just wanted to say that.
And we're so glad you could be here. Thank you so much for coming up and sharing your story.